Welcome to Food for Thought, the place to explore, celebrate, and manifest a life motivated and defined by unconditional compassion and optimal wellness. Today's episode is a rebroadcast of one of the most popular episodes of Food for Thought. I hope you enjoy this episode. I am working on some new episodes as we speak. Lots going on as usual, and I want to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by the sponsors of this podcast, which is you, the listeners of this podcast. So if you'd like to be a supporter and help this podcast continue, you can go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. I also want to remind you that we have some trips that are live right now at joyfulvegantrips.com. In the meantime, I just wanted to make sure you had something to listen to while I'm working on new episodes. And so I thought this was a good episode to keep you occupied until I have a new episode for you. Enjoy. Let me know if you have any questions. As always, you can find me at joyfulvegan.com. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy. I'm so glad to be here with you. Tell me if this is a pattern you've seen before. Celebrity becomes vegan. Vegans laud celebrity. Celebrity stops being vegan. Vegans attack celebrity. That's a pattern I've seen again and again, and you might not be surprised to hear that I'm asked all the time to please weigh in on this phenomenon, and it's rare that I do. It's rare for a few reasons. One is it's hilarious for me to comment on any celebrity. I don't follow celebrity culture. But also because I don't know these people from Adam. I don't know them from Adam and Eve. I don't know them from Adam or Eve. And number two, because my response would be the same every time. And wouldn't you just get bored of that? But really, reason number three is, ironically, what compelled me to do this podcast. And that is their reasons for stopping being vegan are no different than anyone else's, like a non-celebrity, like me and you and just ordinary people, period, full stop. So there's nothing different about a celebrity being vegan and then not being vegan. And I know this is a difficult subject, and I know there are a lot of people talking about this, and lots of YouTubers get on there, and I know that my perspective will be probably a little different. We'll find out. I'd love to know your thoughts about it, but you can imagine that I've thought about this a lot. And of course, just the topic of being vegan, staying vegan, and stopping being vegan is something I think about all the time. It's what we've covered a lot here on this podcast. And of course, it is the topic of my new book, right? The Joyful Vegan. The subtitle is How to Stay Vegan. The implication being that there are people who don't stay vegan. So this is something I talk about a lot, and I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. It's tempting to want to write off this phenomenon of people stopping being vegan to, well, we're going to go over what people attribute it to. So I know it's just tempting to just write it off in their anomalies and gosh, why do they have to do this? But we have to talk about this. It is not as much of an anomaly as you think. It's not like, terribly common. People mostly stay vegan, but there are a lot of people who stop being vegan. So we have to talk about it. We have to talk about ex-vegans. Everything we could say about ordinary non-celebrity ex-vegans applies to celebrity ex-vegans. There's nothing unique about celebrities being vegan than stopping being vegan. They're not a unique form of human being. They have the same challenges, the same blocks, the same excuses, the same fears, the same struggles. But wait, you say, of course there's a difference. They have a huge platform, and it's incumbent upon them to be mindful that when they badmouth veganism or make it seem difficult or treat it like a trend or only focus on the diet aspect, they're doing a disservice to the cause, a cause they said they cared about, and now they're turning their back on and spreading misinformation to their millions of followers about. It's so much worse when a celebrity stops being vegan. Okay, first of all, calm down. Calm down. Second of all, we're going to unpack all of this. We're going to talk about ex-vegan celebrities, vegans' reaction to ex-vegan celebrities, and really just ex-vegans in general, and how to think about all of this. That is what this episode is all about. Now, I'm not going to go through all the celebrities who've made headlines, who became vegan, who were lauded by vegans for being vegan, then stopped being vegan and attacked by vegans for stopping being vegan. There are too many stories like this to even attempt to name them, but I will use one or two celebrities as an example because some of them are recent at the time of this recording, and because the patterns and the reactions are the same as all the others. Now, personally, I'm not someone who as I said, I don't follow celebrity culture. I don't worship any celebrity. I admire some. I admire some celebrities like I admire anyone else. Some of the people I admire are high profile. Some of them are not. Some of them are musicians. Some of them are filmmakers. Some of them are activists. Some of them are known. Some of them are not known. Some of them are writers. Right? I mean, so I admire people, and I absolutely will look up to people, but I don't put any more weight on their words or their actions and thoughts than I do of those of a non-celebrity. But I'm human like everybody else. And I think one of the things that characterizes humans, I think we look to people to be heroes. We look for heroes. We look for models of behavior. We look for models and heroes. And it's completely natural to do that. Now, I personally believe that we each individually have more influence on each other than we think or believe. We, each other as ordinary people, not celebrities. We each individually have so much influence on each other, more than we give ourselves credit for, more than I think we believe. And I think my theory that our obsession with celebrities and celebrity culture is one way we defer and disown that power and influence. But that's another conversation. Humans have always sought heroes, and there's nothing wrong with that. The problems arise when we lower our standards for what constitutes a hero, when we aren't discerning about who deserves our attention and who deserves our trust, and when we conflate fame and wealth with power, with leadership, with integrity, with heroism, to be honest. And it's actually funny because so I say I've never worshipped celebrities. I actually have always kind of seen them just as other people, because they are. And so even when I was little, when it came to my heroes, when it came to people I admired, I never saw a barrier between me and that person. And usually it was a celebrity, because that's what you do when you're younger. Although there were adults in my life who became models for me and role models, and I looked up to them. I mean, I did that. I still do that. I still do. I remember professors I had, and I remember teachers I had when I was younger. And I remember, my parents' friends. There were adults in my life that I really looked up to and admired. And so I did it with celebrities too, but I saw them just as an extension of other adults in my life I could admire and emulate and look to. So I don't think I've ever shared this story, but it's actually kind of a sweet story, and it's a little sad. When I was very young, don't judge me, one of my celebrity heroes was Steve Austin, the $6 Million Man, right? Now, you can just put aside any of your psychological theories about him being a father figure and all that, whatever. I was in love with Steve Austin, the $6 Million Man. I was 7 years old when I decided to write him a letter to tell him how much I loved him. Now, what wasn't to love, right? He was a secret government agent. He had bionic legs. He had a bionic right arm. He had a bionic left eye. He was a hero. He was an astronaut. He fought the bad guys. He was tall, and I thought he was handsome in my little 7-year-old eyes. And so I wrote my first letter to him in 1977, and I addressed it on the envelope to Steve Austin, California, in the West. Now, I lived in New Jersey, so California, I'm sure, seemed like an entirely different world. Probably seemed like space to me, just so far away. And that was the name of the place. It was California in the West. And one of the letters went like this, exactly like this. This is what one of the letters said. Dear Steve, I'm sorry I took long in writing. Thanks so much for your picture. By accident, I ripped it, but I taped it and it looks okay. Do you have any shows on anymore? I better go now. I'm in school. I love you. So that was one of the letters I wrote. And he wrote back. And I wrote again, and he wrote back. And this went on for years. I would give my parents the letters, they would mail them for me, and weeks later, I would receive a reply, like real letters addressed to me with stamps postmarked in the right-hand corner. And eventually, I started addressing my letters to Lee Majors, the actor who played Steve Austin. And I wrote, Dear Lee, how are you? I'm fine. I really miss you and your letters. I'm writing this on April Fool's Day, but you're not a fool. I'm a fool for forgetting to write to you, but I didn't forget you. I'm 11 years old now and in 5th grade. I know you can't come visit me. It was a dumb question anyway. Why the heck would a famous movie star come visit me? I should have known you were busy. Are you still busy? Just kidding. Here's a picture of my room. I hope you'll write a letter as long as this one. Bye. I love you. This is real. I'm not making this up. I have the letters to prove it. In my 3rd year of corresponding with Steve Austin / Lee Majors, I started writing to Bill. Dear Bill, do you remember me? I don't know if I told you I'm 10. Don't think I'm writing to you to impress everybody. I just like knowing I have somebody to talk to. Now, Bill was strong, he was sensitive, and Bill was misunderstood. I was in love with Bill. Who wouldn't be? He was a doctor, he was a scientist, and he was the victim of an accidental overdose of gamma radiation. So what if he transformed into a green monster when he got angry? Nobody's perfect. Besides, it wasn't the Incredible Hulk I fell in love with, but the character who played his alter ego, David Banner. At 10, apparently I was smart enough to address my letters to Bill Bixby, not Dr. David Banner, but clearly I wasn't smart enough to know that the post office required a street address, a city, a state, and a zip code in order to reach the desired party. And so I addressed my letters to Bill Bixby, California in the West. And if you don't know who Bill Bixby is, I don't know what to tell you. It's very sad because he played Dr. David Banner on The Incredible Hulk, and he was so good, and I loved him so much, and he was in many other things. But this went on for 5 years. In the beginning, my letters were mostly about my friends and school and my dog and how jealous I was of Jamie Summers, who was the Bionic Woman, because I was jealous of Jamie Summers. But eventually I used them as an outlet for my fears and my sadness and my grief. Dear Lee, school was out June 12th. My mom and dad are still getting a divorce. So I wrote several letters about how awful the fighting was at home, the ugly custody battle that ensued, and my misery over being uprooted to a new town, a new school, a new home, without my friends, without my dog. And I received comforting letters from them in return. I was almost 12. I was 11, but I was almost 12 and still writing letters when my mother told me that the letters needed to stop, that the whole thing had gone on too long, and that I needed to know. And that was when she told me that all along it was she who had been reading my letters and writing back to me as Lee Majors and Bill Bixby. And I was absolutely devastated and absolutely horrified and embarrassed. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I demanded that she bring me all the letters and help me rip them up and burn them. Even the glossy photo of Lee Majors that my mother had gone to great lengths to get personally autographed to me. And today, only 10 letters remain out of the dozens that were written and received between 1979 and 1982. Now, I thought I had destroyed them all. But when I stormed out of the apartment that day in humiliation and grief, my mother secretly salvaged a few and tucked them away for safekeeping, and I have them now. So I tell you this, I don't know, I think it's a very sweet story. I don't know if it somehow shaped my perception that celebrities are just people who write to you, who just like you have relationships with, because they are. I mean, they're just people. But of course, I didn't have access to them. Still, I had a perception. I've always had this perception that they're just people, because that was part of my formative years. I mean, for 5 years, I wrote to these men. And I had crushes on these older men. I mean, again, I'm sure there's a father figure thing happening there, but I did have crushes. They were always men. I could name more, but I won't because I didn't write to them. But I may have tried. So all that's to say, I'm not above admiring celebrities, but I also think I just never really had more expectations of them than anybody else. And I do think we just tend to have very high expectations in general of each other, of other people, period, full stop, right? But celebrity worship is a thing. And since humans make up the vegan community, vegans play into celebrity worship as much as anyone else, right? Vegan publications and blogs and animal protection organizations all use celebrities to tout and or validate veganism, even if those celebrities have been vegan for like a minute. right? And when I talk about celebrities, I'm not just talking about movie stars and musicians. Writers don't tend to become celebrities as much as, kind of, I think more of the visual medium and the audio medium. I don't know. I mean, there are some who are, but I mean, I think for the most part, authors aren't in the same category where people go crazy over meeting, I don't know, Cormac McCarthy or something like that, the way they do with movie stars. But anyway, I'm also talking about people who became celebrities through reality TV or YouTube or Instagram, right? I mean, people become celebrities from these mediums, and my thoughts about that, applies there as well. But then what happens, lo and behold, that celebrity doesn't stay vegan, doesn't live up to our expectations, talks publicly about how they, didn't like being vegan, or now they're not vegan, they didn't feel well, it didn't work for them, and the vegan community freaks out, and so the cycle continues. And I get it. It can be confusing and frustrating when you hear about people stopping being vegan, whether they're celebrities or not. I mean, right? People have this experience with just friends or, family members. For years, I have been asking, why do people struggle? Why do people stop being vegan? For years, I wanted to understand this too. And so for years, for decades, that's Wyatt. If I look at him, he gets excited and meows and rolls over to show me his belly. Seriously? I'm recording here. Oh my God. Okay. Now he's coming over. Okay, so for years, as you know, I have spent time looking at this. I spent decades looking at what happens in order to help people stay vegan. I mean, right? And so through I started on this podcast. I started identifying these common universal threads that I saw in, pretty much most people who become vegan, whether they do so for health or ethics. And I identified these threads, these common experiences, as holding the answers to these questions that I had been asking, that many of us ask. Why do people struggle? Why do people stop? Why do people become vegan in the first place? And I initially shared these findings in that series, in this podcast, and then I put them together in the book, The Joyful Vegan, How to Stay Vegan in a World That Wants You to Eat Meat, Dairy, and Eggs, which I think like 10 vegans have read. Okay, maybe 20. And yet it examines one of the most common topics that lights up the internet every day. How can people stop being vegan? Which I try to answer in this book. And I know some of you have read it, but certainly not as many as I thought would. Certainly not as many as I hoped would. Certainly not as many as who need to, because I go into the details. Now, maybe it's because I'm not just coming out and saying, they suck. They're just lazy and they're just stupid and they just don't care. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's why. But I mean, they're just vegan publications haven't even reviewed this book. There are vegan magazines who haven't even reviewed this book. And I don't know. I'm glad you read it. But if you have any inclination to send this book to organizations, to magazines, to publications, to bloggers, and just hand it out and just give it to people, I would be grateful, because I think more vegans need to read this book. I don't have all the answers, but I certainly spent a lot of time examining, looking at the data, listening to stories, drawing upon people's experiences. I mean, that's all, we've got data and we've got anecdotal experience and anecdotal evidence, but we've got it. And there's a lot to say about it. So I just really want more people to understand it more. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. I wrote it because for 20 years, I have been guiding people to manifest their own values of compassion and wellness in their everyday behavior, i.e. become vegan. And I've heard from thousands who've resisted, who have become vegan, who have stayed vegan, who struggled with staying vegan, who stopped being vegan. And so for over the last few decades, I have been asking these questions. Why? Why do so many people resist? Why do people become vegan? What motivates them? And why do so many people stop, despite the fact that they had positive intentions, and even despite the fact that they felt good and experienced personal benefits? The more I asked these questions, the more I discovered that there are reasons people stop being vegan. And here's what I can tell you for sure. It's not because they lack willpower. It's not because they lack compassion. It's not because there isn't enough protein in plants, and it's not because there's nothing to eat. Rather, and you've heard me say this, I'm going to repeat this, People stay vegan or stop being vegan depending on how well they navigate the social, cultural, and emotional aspects of living vegan in a non-vegan world, constantly being asked to defend your food choices, being outside of the status quo and not having a sense of belonging, feeling the pressure to be perfect, sometimes self-inflicted, sometimes inflicted by others and other vegans, and experiencing guilt, experiencing remorse, experiencing anger, common experiences that, if not addressed, if not managed, can lead to giving up entirely, which means we breach our values and we sabotage our own goals. Now, hear me and hear me now. These experiences are not unique to non-celebrities. It's not like non-celebrities, like you and me, struggle, but celebrities don't or shouldn't because somehow money and fame make them miraculously immune to these things. I wouldn't write the joyful vegan edition for celebrities and the joyful vegan edition for not. It's absolutely ridiculous. So today, this message, this episode pertains to anyone and everyone who's ever been interested in or curious about ex-vegans, why people stop being vegan. And I don't know, probably not a lot of ex-vegans are listening to this. Maybe they are, maybe. But I hope that who hears this message is vegans. Because one of the most common responses I hear from vegans when people stop being vegan is, I don't get it. I just don't get it. I don't understand. It's so perplexing. It's such a mystery. How does this happen? If we don't get it, if we don't understand, if we think it's a mystery, why people struggle, and that people stop, we're never going to be able to help. If we don't understand why people stop being vegan, we're never going to be able to provide the tools and resources people need to stay vegan. Because if we don't know the problem, how can we provide a solution? So if you've ever said, I don't understand why someone could stop being vegan. I don't understand how someone could stop being vegan. Maybe you're just using it as an expression, but I see it as a statement of truth. And I'm here to tell you, if you have ever said that, it is not a mystery. There are reasons, and they're legitimate reasons that we have to face and address and find solutions for. And spoiler alert, it's not enough to say, but I've never struggled being vegan. I could never stop being vegan. That's not helpful. And it sounds a little judgy, sounds a little arrogant, right? That you kind of put you're in this category over here and everybody else is over here. I could never do that. How could they do it? I don't understand. But it doesn't say anything. It says absolutely nothing. It means nothing. It does nothing to help us understand and address the reasons people give. Even though and if those reasons sound like and may be excuses, even though and if you might not agree with them, even though and if you might not like hearing them, if we just write them off as exceptions and anomalies and declare that, well, they were never really vegan in the first place, so it's not a surprise they're not vegan anymore, that doesn't help us get any closer to understanding what we can do better to support people and advocate better so that they can stay vegan. Now, is it the responsibility of other vegans? Is it another vegan's responsibility to make sure someone else stays vegan? No, that's not what I'm saying. But it is incumbent upon us to understand and to demonstrate compassion, both for others as well as for ourselves. We're not immune to any of the things that compels others to stop being vegan. So we better want to understand so we can avoid the traps ourselves. There are plenty of vegans who said, I would never stop being vegan, who did. So we're not immune. And understanding the why will save a lot of heartache and enable us to spend our time creating resources, creating tools, honing our voice, using our power, right? Rather than spending our time criticizing people or just writing them off as amoral or uncaring. We'll feel a lot more empowered when we say, what can I do to understand? What can I do to help? Rather than saying, how can someone go back? I could never go back. I don't understand how someone can ever go back. Well, let's try to understand, shall we? Let's try to understand. Because I hear these reactions so often in response to folks we know, to friends, coworkers, Facebook followers, family members who stop being vegan. I hear these reactions so much. I also hear these reactions in response to celebrities who stop being vegan, mostly because people put out publicly how they feel about public figures stopping being vegan. So let's talk about them. Most recently, the topic of conversation has been Miley Cyrus. Now, I don't know Miley Cyrus from Eve, never wrote to her, she wasn't my pen pal, so I don't know her. I know nothing about her life. I know nothing about her struggles, her personality, her history, absolutely nothing. But I'm using her as an illustration because the reasons she gave when she publicly declared she was no longer vegan are not unlike the reasons I've heard again and again. And the public reactions among vegans to the reasons she gave are not unlike the reactions I've seen again and again and again. So I think she's a good example, a good template onto which I can map other examples. She's like our case study, right? In The Joyful Vegan, I include stories from people I've heard from over the years that I think represent a general audience, right, as case studies. So that's what Miley will be for us. She will be our case study. So here's what I know. According to her, she became vegan in 2013 and stopped in 2019. And like many new vegans, when she first became vegan, she spoke passionately about veganism and animal protection. She promoted her vegan wedding. Her husband at the time was also vegan. She said she would always be vegan and never eat animal products again. She got a vegan tattoo. And her vegan identity was a huge part of certainly her public identity, and no doubt her personal identity. So her vegan identity was part of her identity, publicly and privately. On a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, Cyrus said she has, quote, been experimenting with her diet and began eating fish in 2019. Quote, I've been vegan for a very long time, and I had to introduce fish and omegas into my life because my brain wasn't functioning properly. That's what she said. She explained that once she introduced fish into her diet, now I feel so much sharper than I was, and I think that at one point I was pretty malnourished. Now, Joe Rogan quipped that she should watch out because the vegans will be coming for her, and she said she's used to people coming for her. Alas, the vegans did not disappoint. Some responses, F her for spreading misinformation about how vegan omega-3s work. F Miley Cyrus for not being vegan anymore. There's a bunch of F hers. She has such a huge platform. What she's doing is incredibly detrimental to the cause. And I hear that a lot. We're going to come back to that. The responses vary. There's vitriol like that. There's judgment. There's shaming. There's people making fun of her voice, what she says, how she says it, people making fun of what words she uses. There's sadness. There's disappointment. And there's lots of, I just don't get it. There's lots of, I just don't get it. I just don't understand. See, you can make fun of me. I just made a mistake there. You can make fun of me. So let's parse this out. First, I want to talk about the disappointment. There's a lot of disappointment. This is a common thread running through comments I've seen online, on response videos, on social media, on my social media channels, and in private messages to me, disappointment. Even when accompanied by, we shouldn't care about what celebrities say, what invariably follows is still, I'm disappointed. So there's a popular saying that goes, expectations are premeditated resentments. Now, I know this is not a popular perspective, and some of you might stop listening right now, but if someone disappoints us, it's because we had expectations, and that's on us. I'll give you a moment to hit stop and say, that's bull, I'm out of here. Okay. The definition of disappointment is to be sad or displeased because someone or something has failed to fulfill one's hopes or expectations. If we're disappointed because of what a stranger does or doesn't do, that's on us. If we're disappointed because of what anyone does, a friend, a family member, partner, whatever, that's on us. Having expectations leads to disappointment. Expectations are premeditated resentments. A more ancient version of this is, of course, you know me, I'm going to quote the Tao Te Ching, hope is as hollow as fear, because in both ways, feeling excited for the best case, hope, and feeling anxious about the worst case, fear, you're relinquishing your power and you're putting all of it in the hands of something or someone you have no control over. And either way, you're feeling anxiety. Either way, you feel anxiety. And then when the best case doesn't pan out or the worst case does, you feel anger, resentment, judgment, outrage, cynicism, whatever. It's a lose-lose situation, hope and expectation, hope and fear. Now, we could talk for hours about what it means to temper our expectations in real world situations and in actual relationships, how difficult it is to not have expectations. It is a lifelong endeavor. And we can talk about how liberating it is when we really understand this, that our happiness or our unhappiness, our peace of mind or anxiety, our power or our relinquishment of our power has so much to do with expectations. It is so difficult. It takes so much work. It takes constant vigilance, and it takes a lot of self-reflection to see the world in this way, right? But that's not what this whole episode is about. But there's a lot to say around that. I'm not saying it's easy. It's not, and it's certainly not bad. It's not wrong to have expectations. Let's just say it's disempowering. And so maybe you would make better sense to you if I talked about reasonable and unreasonable expectations, right? Right. So if we talk about that we have, reasonable or unreasonable expectations, maybe that resonates more, right? Now, I know some of you are saying that's absolutely ridiculous. Of course, we have to have expectations. How else will people know what we want and how to treat us? Obviously, we all have expectations in our relationships. If I call David and I ask him to pick me up at 6:00 and he doesn't arrive until 6:30, is that a valid reason for me to be disappointed? It seems pretty obvious, right? Well, the more enlightened among us, which I don't count myself among, would say, well, it was your expectation of his punctuality that made you mad, that made you disappointed, that disappointed you, right? You're the one who holds the power over yourself, over your perception, over your expectations, right? It's not that he was late that made me disappointed. It's that I expected him to be on time that made me disappointed when he was late, right? Does that make sense? I mean, we can do a whole episode on expectations, but that's really ultimately what it comes down to. If we talk about realistic or unrealistic expectations, it's on us. It's on us. But even when it comes to reasonable and unreasonable expectations in our actual relationships, I'm not talking about what we expect from someone we don't know, but in our actual relationships, it stems from experience and it stems from trust, right? So if I tend to trust that David will be on time, that's because we have a history. That's because he has shown me in the past that he's punctual, right? That he values my time and that he wouldn't keep me waiting if he could help it. So we have that history, right? When it comes to expectations of people we have no history with, no experience with, and that's hard. So by the way, that's hard enough to have that history and still try not to have expectations and be disappointed and be resentful, etc. But with people we have no experience with, no history with, no mutual understanding of trust with, like a stranger or a celebrity, then yes, in every way, it's on us that we feel disappointed when they act or don't act in a certain way. And it's very interesting because in looking at some of the vegans' reactions to Miley Cyrus's pronouncement, I saw a number of comments that used the word trust. A lot of them has to do, how can we trust her? Like, what influencers can we trust? We just don't know who to trust. I think at this point, someone said, the only Hollywood celebrity that can likely be trusted to remain vegan for life is Joaquin Phoenix. And then there was another one, never trust celebrity vegans, except Joaquin Phoenix. I don't know what would happen if Joaquin Phoenix announced that he wasn't vegan anymore. The internet would just break. It would just break because everyone's like, don't trust celebrities except for Joaquin Phoenix. No, it's such an interesting response. This idea that our trust has been breached, as if we had some kind of mutual understanding with the people who are complete strangers, as if they owe us something, right? As if they promised us something. Now, I bring up this idea of trust and expectations because this is how I see a lot of vegans talk about ex-vegans. They talk about it as a kind of betrayal. Now, one way this manifests itself in, again, these public responses, aside from the obvious, which is, I'm so disappointed and you can't trust any of them, is the idea that when they announce it to the world that they're no longer vegan, that it hurts the cause. Why can't they just say nothing? So here are some responses I've seen online to illustrate this. Here's just a few. While I think it's important to understand the many different aspects that turns vegans into ex-vegans and to be understanding with everyone, it upsets me when someone with so much influence denounces veganism in this way. Another one, musicians and actors are in a unique position to influence others and must accept this responsibility and refrain from projecting unhealthy choices. Another one, I just don't understand the need to announce to the world the fact that they're not vegan anymore. Well, but you're announcing to the world the fact that you're upset about the fact that they announced that they're not vegan anymore. So maybe you can understand it because we do that all the time, right? You're projecting your thoughts publicly about what she did. So maybe you can understand it. Anyway, so I just don't understand why, the need to announce to the world the fact that they're not vegan anymore, especially when they use such stupid and factually incorrect reasons. It's just so damaging to the cause, right? Again, that idea. As a vegan for the animals, I feel we already have a hard enough time explaining that we do not need animal products of any kind to be healthy. And as soon as a celebrity goes back to being a carnist, stating that they were lacking in XYZ, it's almost like a free pass to the "see, I told you so" brigade. Another one, not only do they stop being vegan, but for some inexplicable reason, go public and bash it. I could understand buying into family or peer pressure, but being vegan, I'd still want to do it in a way that hurts animals less, thus silently moving on, not shouted out against onto the most anti-vegan platform available, saying negative things about vegans. Because she's a celebrity and has a mic put in front of her so often, when she blames veganism for her brain malfunction, it does serious damage to the cause. Like it or not, she influences young people. If, as a celebrity, you're going to spout off something that isn't your job, music or acting, then you should either, one, know what you're talking about, or two, STFU, you know what that means. Another one, I don't think celebrities or non-celebrities should be criticized for deciding that they feel better being non-vegan. I have a problem that they feel the need to broadcast or make up that their brains work better being non-vegan. Stop being vegan and shut up. And then finally, I'm not in the business of convincing others to work through their issues regarding failing at veganism. That's their journey at their pace. It just irks me that when they go out and comment on how they used to be vegan and why they stopped, when they are really referring to and thinking of the food, they were likely plant-based primarily. This gives naysayers fuel to say veganism is ridiculous. Anyway, okay, so there are a few things I want to say about this. Number one, first of all, I find it ironic. This is just another aside. I find it ironic that everyone wants celebrities to STFU, whether it comes to politics, right? Why should an actor be talking about politics? Or why should a musician be talking about, policy, right? Or ethics or whatever. Everyone wants celebrities to STFU when they're not on your side. But when they're on your side, when they're aligned with your opinion and your values, how wonderful that they use their platform to share their thoughts, even if they're an actor or a musician or whatever. But when they're not on your side, when they have different values, different opinions, different life experiences, they should just STFU, right? Like, I don't remember seeing too many vegans complain about the fact that Miley Cyrus, a pop singer, was talking about veganism and animals all the time, or how Joaquin Phoenix spoke up for the animals at the Oscars. So, right, using his entertainment platform to talk about his values, right? But when they speak about their values or beliefs and experiences that don't happen to agree with ours, we want them to STFU. So let's just be consistent, right? We all use our platforms and we all use the tools we have to share the thoughts we have. Let's just be consistent. That's just what that looks like. That's just human. That's just humanness. So related to that, like I said, everyone's so thrilled when a celebrity announces that they're vegan and so thrilled when they use their platform to advocate for it. And that was the case with Miley Cyrus. She did so for 6 years. Even someone who tries to avoid celebrity culture. I knew that Miley Cyrus was vegan and that she had a tattoo and that she had a vegan wedding. I can't avoid it because it's just, people talk about it. It's everywhere. And vegans were so happy that she was doing that, right? But in that way, she's no different than any new vegan. I identify this in The Joyful Vegan as stage 4, evangelism and fundamentalism. The full chapter, the full stage is called Evangelism and Fundamentalism, Knowing the Difference Between Enthusiasm and Zealotry. Now, I open the chapter with this. There's a universal joke that goes, how do you know if someone's vegan? Don't worry, they'll tell you. On the one hand, it's true. Vegans do talk about being vegan a lot of the time, especially new vegans whose altered view of the world informs everything they say and see. How can we not? Having had a significant shift in the way we live our lives and in the way we see the world, it's only natural to want to share that experience. Sharing enthusiasm brings us closer to the people in our lives, it validates us, and it makes us feel good. I continue under a subheading called Vegangelism. When I tell people that I've identified this stage in our vegan journey as evangelism, or better yet, vegangelism, I'm met with a little laughter and a lot of head nodding because everyone knows exactly what I mean, especially when we're newly vegan. We're excited, we're passionate, and we want everyone to experience the same enthusiasm or at least know about ours. This isn't to say that vegans are never preachy and didactic, and I talk about preachy and didactic vegans in the second half of that chapter, or that raising awareness about violence against animals isn't necessary or shouldn't be part of our advocacy. I talk about that in the chapter on advocacy. But what I'm referring to here is the genuine excitement we feel having become awake, the passionate expression of, oh my word, I had no idea. And now that I know and my life has changed for the better, I want to shout it from the rooftops. It's the desire to share the good news. And so Miley Cyrus did. She was no different than anyone else who becomes vegan and wants to shout the good news from the rooftops, wear vegan message wear, promote their veganism on their social media channels, and in some cases, in her case, in particular, get a vegan tattoo. That's kind of where we're at in this stage, right? This enthusiasm. Now, we say we shouldn't treat celebrities differently because they're just people. And you can see perfectly characteristic behavior here that the majority of vegans exhibit, and even plant-based. I mean, when we make a change in our diet, in our lives that make us feel good, we tell people, we tell others. The only difference is that she has a much bigger audience than you and me. And the difference is the media pay attention to everything she says and does because the public does, right? So leaving the general public then, right? So she uses her platform, she spreads the word, she's excited, and then it's up to the audience to either take what she says with a grain of salt or give it a lot of credence. Each member of the general public responds one way or another. The point is, vegans were thrilled when Miley Cyrus talked about veganism and animal protection so passionately, hoping that her audience would follow suit. Well, that's the first problem. Expectations that her talking about being vegan would have any impact on anyone at all, right? Expectations, right? But it's also worth saying that her audience isn't just a bunch of automatons flip-flopping every time she says or does something. Neither is my audience. Neither is your audience. You're one of my listeners. You're one of my viewers or readers or followers, whatever, right? And I know you're not blindly following everything I say and do as if I'm some kind of cult leader, as if you're some kind of brainwashed sponge. You have your own mind. Now, yes, young people tend to be more impressionable, but that's young people. Like, that's just life. You're not going to change that. Like, a lot is being said all the time that young people hear and they vacillate one way or another because that's what you do when you're young, because you're still trying to figure out who you are and what you like and what you believe and what you want. Like, that's what it looks like to be a young person. We all remember that. So there's nothing unique about that. Now, look, I'm sure some of her audience, some of her fans did start eating more plant foods. Maybe some bought commercial vegan products. Maybe some became vegan. Maybe some tried being vegan, learned about veganism, learned about animal cruelty as a result of her being vegan. That's great. That's the way it works. That's what this looks like. We're inspired. We're persuaded. We're dissuaded. We're moved. We're supported. We're engaged. We're influenced. We're influenced and inspired and moved all the time. Like all of us, celebrity, stranger, friend, coworker, family member, all the time we're being influenced and engaged and persuaded and inspired. That's what it looks like. We influence one another. All of us. We're not just influenced by celebrities. We influence each other. That's what I keep saying, that we actually have more power than we think. We are influenced by each other all the time. We are role models to one another, right? I don't believe that people who are in the public eye should, what was one of the comments? One of the comments said they should know that. No, we should all know that. We should all know that we're influencing people all the time, that we're inspiring each other all the time, that we're each a role model to each other all the time, right? That is us taking responsibility. But this is what it looks like. Something sparks our interest and our attention. We dive deeper. We possibly make some changes ourselves. That's a good thing, right? But it's not like a celebrity announces that they're vegan and then all their fans and audience members become vegan. And then they say, I'm no longer vegan. And they stop being vegan, right? It just doesn't work that way. And if it did, you don't have any control over that. All you can control is how you behave, what you say, how you advocate, how you present yourself, how you characterize veganism, right? How someone else behaves is not yours to control. And how people interpret what someone says is not yours to control. Do your work, then step back. And my God, Miley Cyrus is one person. She's not a demigod. The idea that she damages the cause, that she's going to bring down veganism, I'm sorry, but that's absolutely misguided. The same thing with the anti-vegan Joe Rogan, right? He's one person. But if you think Joe Rogan or Miley Cyrus or fill in the blank individual has the power to damage the cause, then that's a pretty fragile cause. If one person can bring the whole thing down because of their opinion about it, then it doesn't say much for the philosophy of compassion, the philosophy of veganism. And if that's what you're afraid of, then it doesn't say much about your faith in it. Because one person doesn't have that kind of power. Not even, Miley Cyrus, not even a well-known vegan spokesperson, not even Joaquin Phoenix. Let me tell you something right now, folks. Brace yourself. I hope for I hope for everybody. Joaquin Phoenix will probably stay vegan, but you know what? He might not. Brace yourself. And here's the thing. Joaquin Phoenix stops being vegan. Veganism doesn't collapse. He didn't destroy veganism, right? If he comes out and says, yeah, I just don't want to be vegan anymore. It wasn't great for me. I did it, not doing it anymore. It doesn't come tumbling down, right? We're all just conduits. We're all just people. We're just individuals. We're not demigods, right? I don't take credit for someone becoming vegan because of my work. Just like I don't take the blame for someone stopping being vegan despite my work. My words and my work will attract people based on where they're at in their own journey. Just like the celebrities who say that, or the non-celebrities, or the podcasters, or the advocates, or the actors, or the musicians. They're not magicians, right? They're just people expressing their opinions and using the tools at their disposal to share their thoughts. All of us have tools at our disposal. Joe Rogan's tool, it's a microphone. My tool is a microphone and a pen. Use your tools, use your power, use your voice, and stop over-exaggerating the power of others. There is no public relations firm for veganism. I'm sorry, but there's not. Just let go of any hope and expectation that it will be portrayed exactly the way you think it should be portrayed in any way, by other vegans, by vegan organizations, by animal groups, by vegan companies, in the media. And thank goodness there's not one single PR group, people. It would be called Big Brother if it existed. There's not one vegan mind out there. Thank goodness. Vegans are a diverse and varied group made up of individuals. Whatever celebrity or other vegan or plant-based person in the media says about their experience, it's their experience. And they're talking about their approach and their beliefs and their philosophy, right? But maybe they didn't get the press release or the vegan script because there isn't one. If they don't talk about veganism the way you would, it's because they're not you and they didn't get your script. There isn't a single message out there to make the definition of veganism, be as clear to the public as possible, but you can get your script out. You can convey veganism to the public in the way that you think is effective and consistent and accurate and clear. Do your own work. Write your own books. Write your own script. Write your own letters. Be a leader in an organization. Be a leader in thought. Get on the media, talk about veganism the way you want to, make your own videos, create your own podcast, do it exactly the way you want. But I'll warn you, when you do, some of whom are watching or reading or listening to you will cut you down and criticize you for not doing it the way they would do it. Some will be inspired, some will make a change, some won't. You can't please everyone. Do your work, then step back. The rest is not yours. Now, I have a pretty good track record when it comes to people being inspired to change, just because I've heard from people. But even those who become vegan from my work are not my successes to chalk up. They're not wins for me anymore. Those who don't become vegan from my work are my failures. So this idea that we can control what people say and how other people are taking it, it's just misguided. It's just magical thinking, right? Now, having said that, will Miley Cyrus coming out and saying that being vegan wasn't healthy compel others to believe that and think the same? Yep. Yes. But people think that already. She's providing a confirmation bias, which people are looking for all the time. That's what humans do. But this idea that her fans and followers are just lemmings, I said lemmings, that they're just holding on to every single word she says and then pivoting one way or the other based on a statement she makes or a lifestyle change she makes or a food she eats, it's magical thinking. Some will. But they may very well do so because they heard the same thing from a stranger or a friend or a family member. Some may hear it and go, I don't care, whatever, it doesn't mean anything to me at all, right? In other words, how about attributing a little less power to celebrities in general and Miley Cyrus and Joe Rogan in particular, and giving a little more credit to their audience? Right? I mean, how do you respond when you hear from people that you follow or admire? No doubt you're a fan of some celebrities, maybe Lee Majors, maybe Bill Bixby. Do you vacillate based on what your favorite celebrity does? If not, is it because you're special or you're so unique or so rare? No, you are probably like the majority. You mostly appreciate them for the thing you started following them for in the first place. You may be interested in what they have to say about other things, and possibly even try a product they sell or an idea they espouse. But in the end, you're your own person. And what you learn or gain from having followed them may or may not get added to the many layers that make up your complexity. Welcome to the world. That's what everybody else experiences. The majority of people experience that. So that's that. That's the second thing I wanted to say about the fear that her announcing this publicly is going to turn vegans into non-vegans like magic and that it's going to hurt the cause and bring the whole thing down. Now, I have a lot more to say about the cause, and I'm going to address that in another episode altogether. But here's a teaser. I don't believe there is such a thing as a single cause in this case. I don't believe that there is a single vegan movement. And I think that's what creates such anxiety for people. I think a lot of conflict stems from the perception that we have a single movement and people are betraying it when they do this or that. But that's going to have to wait for another day. So, okay, we have disappointment and expectations. We have trust and betrayal. We have this fear that there's going to be damage to the cause. I've addressed those. The next thing I want to address is the very, 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 very common retort that if she stopped being vegan, then clearly she was never really vegan in the first place. And that manifests itself in a few different ways. As people say, they were never really vegan to begin with, or they were never really doing it for the animals, or that they were only plant-based and not vegan. Because if you were truly vegan, you would never go back. You were a fake vegan otherwise. That's what we're going to address next. But first, I need to take a breath and thank my supporters, all of you who are listening and supporting and subscribing to this podcast. You noticed, listen, there's no pre-recorded ad cutting through this podcast at various times in the beginning or the end trying to sell you something. That's because this podcast is listener supported by you. You went over to Patreon. You chose the level you wanted to support at. You chose annual or monthly, which is now an option. Annual is now an option. That's why there aren't ads on this podcast, because of people like you, people like some new supporters, Nina Bagley, thank you very much. Stacy Shepard, thank you very much. Katrina Hawk, is it Hawk or Hotch? Thank you very much. Valerie Nagelson. Evie, can't tell what your full name is, but you joined as an annual and new supporter, which is awesome. Thank you so much. Angela Guerrero, Patty Henriksen also changed her monthly to annual. You can stay monthly, but I'll tell you right now that the amount of time it takes me, and I mostly don't have the time to do this, to go and tell people that their credit cards declined is time you don't know. You do not want me to spend my time doing that. Like, that's not what you want me to do, but I have to do it in order to let people know. Most people then just go change their credit card, but I don't have time to do it. So the pledges people have made, they're not going through. So it's easier if you do annual. And then that won't happen every month. It might just happen every year. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much to my heroic platinum and gold supporters, Morgan Hall, Nina Bircher, Jennifer Watkins, Ranjini Mohan, Michal Stone, David Cabrera, and Alexander Gray. And thanks to everybody at every level. I'm not saying that podcast sponsorship from a company could never happen, but pledges are down. And if there's a way to keep doing this podcast while preserving its integrity, I will do so. But I would prefer to keep it listener supported like it's been for so long. So if you listen to this podcast and you want to keep it listener supported, go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, and thank you in advance. Okay, back to that very common retort that if someone stops being vegan, then clearly they were never really vegan to begin with. I could fill hours of the podcast with examples of such responses, but here are just a few. I'm just going to do a few because it's really just, I see it again and again. If they're not vegan anymore, were they ever really vegan? When I first saw these attacks on Miley, my instinct wasn't to get mad, but I thought, well, obviously she wasn't in it for the animals. Miley Cyrus appropriated culture and pretended to be vegan. What a clown. Okay. I think we need to be careful with our definition and use of the word vegan. To some, many actually, it's simply a diet and doesn't have a deeper meaning other than they want to try it, call themselves vegan, maybe lose weight, see how it goes. In contrast, to others, it's a deeply meaningful way of life, one that allows for a serious advancement in their very being. Once they connect, as we vegans say, with veganism, there really is no going back. It's like once you learn 1 + 1 is 2, there's no going back to not understanding what 1 + 1 is. Another person said, personally, I'm not a fan of highlighting ex-vegans if their intentions with veganism didn't stem from ethics in the first place, unless it's to highlight there's a difference between diet and ethics. Another, I feel that many ex-vegans were only in it for health reasons and not for the animals or the environment. Perhaps they announced that they were vegan to follow a trend or be cool. Once you understand the misery suffered by animals, you can't go back. Another person says, I don't understand how anyone can go back. If it's a moral perspective, if you abhor animal cruelty, how do you suddenly stick your head back in the sand? I think the celebs that quit never had their head in the right place to begin with and were probably motivated by losing weight or being trendy or something else. If they had a strong ethical conviction, how do they just say, I'm just going to go back? And then so on and so on and so on. And then, right. So we've got fake, we've got never really were, got doing it for the wrong reasons, and then reminiscent of an unkind, ungracious, name-calling Twitter troll who shall remain nameless. Some gave her the nickname of My Lie, as in dishonest, My Lie Cyrus, indicating that she was a fake vegan and an authentic vegan and just lied or misrepresented that she was vegan, right? So to summarize, what I'm gleaning when I read these, and I clearly am not the only one reading these, they're out there for the world to see, if you're no longer vegan, you were either a fake vegan, you were lying about being vegan, you were never really vegan to begin with, which I guess means that you lied, or you were not really vegan because you were plant-based, right? That is, people were in it for their health and not for the animals. So you weren't really, but you weren't really, because you didn't do it for the right reasons. And we see this in the responses about Miley Cyrus and other ex-vegan celebrities, you're either amoral or you're mentally unstable, right? So those are the responses I'm seeing, right? That they're fake, they're liars, they're never were, inauthentic, whatever. So I've thought about this a lot. Over the last, 8 years that I started gathering data and writing The Joyful Vegan, over the last several years, I've thought about this a lot. And here are some thoughts about why we conclude, these are my thoughts, about why we conclude that ex-vegans were never really vegan to begin with. Because that is what we hear people say. They were never really vegan to begin with. They were never truly vegan. That's the way it's phrased. It seems to me that when you hear that someone becomes vegan, right? Someone you know, someone you don't know, a celebrity, someone, whatever. There's this tacit understanding, this tacit expectation, really, that you're now in the same club, that you're on the same team, right? But that, of course, is a perception with problems of its own. I talk about this when I talk about vegan identity in The Joyful Vegan. But still, there's this idea that we're of the same mind when it comes to how we think about animals or what we think is normal or natural to eat, right? And I cannot emphasize enough that it's a false idea that we all think the same way, even when we become vegan, right? I will talk about how I don't think there is a single vegan movement, but we're seeking commonality, we're seeking community. And in finding that commonality, in perceiving that commonality, we feel less alone, especially in a world where we are definitely the minority and not part of the status quo, right? And so we're very protective. We're very possessive of this philosophy that we prescribe to, right? In the most general sense, I could say that the philosophy that the thread that runs through all of the different movements or motivations is that we don't need to eat animals, and that we feel great not doing so. We feel great not eating animals, right? And so we're really excited about it in ourselves. We're really excited to find that others prescribe to this idea as well, and they manifest it in their behavior. It's like we know the secret handshake, and that feels really good. So when someone takes a backward step, and I don't know how else to say this other than, and they leave the club, that's how we kind of perceive it, right? Our reaction is very personal. I think it's one of the reasons we talk about it like a betrayal. We feel betrayed. We feel that someone has left the club. We feel that they're not one of us anymore. And I think what also happens is that in being protective of this oh so delicate minority idea, this minority paradigm, or I think compassion is a majority philosophy, but in terms of manifesting in our behavior, we're so protective of it. When someone leaves it, we feel we have to defend it even more, right? Especially if someone goes against it and bashes it publicly. But more than just defend it, we feel we have to distance ourselves from the one who left and say, well, they were never really one of us to begin with. They were never the real thing. They were never truly aligned with our philosophy, because if they were, it follows logically, then they wouldn't have and they couldn't have betrayed that ideology and gone back, right? In other words, we have to take away their legitimacy. We have to take away their authenticity, because if we didn't, then wait a second. If they were really vegan but went back to eating animals, then there's a risk that we could too. And so to distance ourselves from that possibility, we have to delegitimize them and call them fake, or to say that they never really were, or to say that they weren't a real vegan. The ex-vegan becomes a threat to our own veganism unless we distance ourselves from them. And so rather than examine where they may have struggled, or even acknowledge that their challenges were authentic, or that we may have had the same challenges or struggles or doubts ourselves, we distance ourselves from them. We wipe our hands clean. We write them off as an anomaly, someone clearly lacking ethics, clearly lacking compassion, lacking commitment, being mentally unsound or lying, but certainly not committed and compassionate like me, right? I mean, that's what we say. We say, I don't understand. If you really cared, then how could you go back? I mean, the implication being that you clearly don't care. If you really had compassion, you wouldn't go back. If you really had ethics, if you really meant it, right? So the implication is you're an anomaly, because if you really cared, you wouldn't do this. You're not like me, because I really care, right? It reminds me a bit of how we consider anyone who commits violence or atrocities a monster. That's how we kind of talk about, people who commit like pretty heinous crimes. We talk about them as monsters, not human. Because if we considered them human, we'd have to look at the fact that we're also human, hang on, and we're also potentially capable of violence, right? But if we look at them as an anomaly, we can distance ourselves from them and say, see, that's not us, and never have to look at our own potential for violence. Another way we delegitimize ex-vegans and distance ourselves from them, especially when it comes to celebrities or YouTube influencers, is to say that they're doing it for attention and money, that they stop being vegan for money and attention, which I find to be a bit of a stretch, but this is what I see people say, that they're so calculating when it comes to their need for attention and fame and fortune, even though they already have it, that they strategize with their public relations team to book interviews that they can announce that they're no longer vegan on, right? With the intention of making money. I'm not sure how that would work. And getting attention, like, I think that's a bit of a stretch, but it's almost as if we can't bear the possibility that they did just struggle or just want out, right? They just stopped being vegan. Like, we have to find some nefarious reason for it happening. I feel like Cher in Moonstruck when she slaps Nicolas Cage and says, snap out of it, right? Snap out of it. Miley Cyrus was vegan for 6 years and now she's not vegan. She didn't lie. She wasn't a fake vegan. She didn't stop being vegan because she wanted money. I mean, I don't know. I'm not in her head, but I'm just going to guess it's probably not what it is. She didn't stop being vegan because she wanted views on Joe Rogan's podcast. She was vegan and now she's not vegan. She was vegan for many reasons. I don't know all of them. I can only go by what she said, just like I can only go by what anybody says, right? But like many of us, I believe that she says she went vegan for the animals out of compassion because she realized that they were hurt, right? And then we're motivated to stay vegan for many reasons. We go vegan for one usually. There's lots of reasons. We want to keep manifesting our values and our behavior. It feels good. We feel great mentally, emotionally, spiritually, etc. From everything she said and did, she stopped eating animals out of compassion, and for all intents and purposes, she was an ethical vegan. She stopped eating animal flesh and fluids, and then she started eating animal flesh and fluids. If we just dismiss her and all the other celebrities we say this about, all the other ex-vegans we say this about, if we just dismiss her as another unethical sellout who was only doing it for her health, then we're missing yet another opportunity to reflect and understand, and possibly to do better as advocates or just as human beings. Now, in my research, I did find that people who become vegan for health reasons may indeed have a higher rate of recidivism than people who become vegan for ethics. But first of all, it's not that people who become vegan for the animals never stop being vegan. They do. And to just dismiss them, well, they were never really vegan, right? And then surmise, well, they were only plant-based, is to put our heads in the sand and avoid looking at what's painful but true. That good people make harmful choices, that you can be ethical and willfully blind, that you can be compassionate in one area and misguided in another. However, when vegans become ex-vegans, right? Even if they originally went vegan for the animals, for ethics, because they don't want to contribute to violence against animals, like whatever they became vegan for, invariably they say that they had to stop being vegan for health reasons, right? When really it was more likely that they just fell off the wagon or were lazy or felt pressured or just wanted to eat an animal product, right? But invariably, when an ex-vegan talks about their transformation from ethical vegan, from vegan who cared, to ex-vegan, they couch it in terms of nutrient necessity. That they didn't want to eat animals again, but they had to. They simply had to because they weren't well. Do you think it's a coincidence that every single one of them says that? I don't, right? Now, I do think it's absolutely possible and probable that people on very restrictive diets will suffer health consequences. And that's what I was talking about when I said that, that it's possible that the reason people who are motivated by health when they stop eating animals have higher rates of recidivism because they're eating restrictive diets. Now, not everybody who does this for health is eating a restrictive diet, but many who do it for health reasons have expectations and they think it's going to be a panacea for all of their problems, and they eat, only certain foods, or they avoid lots of foods. And we'll talk about that in a second. But the point is, of course, people can suffer health consequences, but it's most likely not because they weren't eating animal products. It's most likely because they were eating restrictively. So just using Cyrus as an example, again, she is the template upon which we lay our maps. Just as an example, she said she followed the quote unquote strictest vegan diet you've ever known. I think her point was to say that I was as committed as anybody. But when she says that, I don't know exactly what that means, and I'm not going to speculate. But for someone who I imagine has a pretty crazy punishing schedule and someone who's under immense pressure to look a certain way, I don't doubt that her body suffered for it and that she did restrict her food intake, right? And in this too, she is not unique. One of the things I talk about in The Joyful Vegan is the very real phenomenon of what's now called orthorexia. I tend to prefer rigid eating. And there's evidence that this can lead to recidivism, as I said, to returning to eating animal products. Now, two explanations for self-described health vegans returning to eating meat, dairy, and eggs are: one, eating a calorically restrictive diet, and two, having unreasonable expectations about the healing power of plant foods. And I talk about this in the book. There's a study in Appetite that found that health-motivated vegans were less likely to take either vitamin B12 or vitamin D supplements, possibly because they believed that a whole foods plant-based diet would be that would be superior, that would be a superior source of essential nutrients, and that supplements were artificial and thus impure, right? Now, if that's true, it may place health-motivated vegans at higher risk for nutrient deficiencies, and it may also be the reason they return to eating meat, dairy, and eggs and feel better once they do. It's not that eating a whole foods plant-based diet isn't optimal in terms of health and wellness. And of course, no reputable doctor would recommend substituting dietary supplements for healthy plant foods. But nutrient deficiencies can be caused by any number of factors: hormones, stress, malabsorption, digestive issues, and may not always be remedied by whole foods alone. In other words, supplements may help. The bottom line is, if you expect veganism to be a panacea for all your health issues, you're more likely to attribute any new hard to diagnose ailment or possible nutrient related deficiency to the fact that you've stopped eating animal products, right? And add to that obsessive Googling, getting nutrition advice from the unaccredited University of YouTube, and following ex-vegans on social media, or speaking to anti-vegan podcasters, and chances are you'll stop being vegan. And yes, even celebrities are victims of this. They are not immune because they have fame and money. So this idea that I saw people criticizing oh my God, she's wealthy enough to afford a nutritionist, but she's getting nutrition advice from YouTube because she'd mentioned, yes, everybody does this. That's the point. You say that celebrities are the same as everybody else, and then you're shocked when they act like everybody else. Yes. This is what people do, right? So the idea that we take charge of our own health, and that people who are interested in, looking up this information online, we all do it. That's not inherently bad, but when speculation supplants science and diet trends take precedence over common sense, that's a slippery slope, right? If you become convinced that it's more natural to get your omega-3 fatty acids from eggs or fish, two of the foods that she said she was getting her omega-3s from now, rather than from a supplement, even though these days, of course, egg-laying hens and farm-raised fish get their fatty acids from supplements added to their feed, you're likely to start eating eggs and fish again. You may even feel better once you do so. It's possible, however, that you would have also felt better if you took omega-3 supplements from algae, which is the origin of omega-3 fatty acids in the first place, while continuing to eat a whole foods plant-based diet. The same applies to eating a calorically restrictive diet, which many ex-vegans admit to adhering to. If you are perpetually lethargic, hungry, and unable to concentrate, it may be because you're not getting enough fuel, that is, calories, to sustain your energy and mental acuity. If you add meat, dairy, and eggs back into your diet, or just dairy and eggs, or just fish and eggs, right? And thus more calories, you will most likely feel more energetic, more satiated, and more clear-headed. It's possible, however, that you would have felt more energetic, satiated, and clear-headed if you just ate more calorie-dense plant foods. Now, all that's in The Joyful Vegan, which I hope you enjoy. Miley Cyrus talks about the fact that she started feeling better after she incorporated fish into her diet. So just please reference what I just said as a possible explanation for that. But there's more to say, because while it's possible Cyrus wasn't feeling well because of her lifestyle, all the factors that contribute to how we feel, sleep, alcohol, drugs, stress, physical exertion, whatever. I mean, she said she was running on empty after Glastonbury. This was so funny. She played at Glastonbury, which is very, very, it's a huge outdoor concert. What, I don't know, you were running on empty after performing for hours outside in the sun for thousands of people after being on the road? Yeah, okay. That makes sense that you were running on empty. I can see why. But I do want to address the possibility that just adding fish back into her diet and making her feel better was just an excuse, right? Because perhaps she just wanted to eat fish. Perhaps she liked the taste. Perhaps she missed it. Perhaps others were pressuring her. Perhaps she smelled it and just wanted to eat it. Perhaps her desire for the anticipated pleasure of eating that fish overrode the reasons she had for going vegan in the first place, that animals shouldn't have to suffer for our taste buds. Now, wouldn't it be lovely if she came out, or if ex-vegans just came out and said, yeah, mate, I just really wanted some fish. I kind of failed. I chose convenience over compassion, but it's all good. I'm doing my best. And though I kind of fell off the wagon, I'm getting back on again. Wouldn't it be nice, right? Or something that demonstrated some self-awareness and responsibility? Sure. But number one, expectations and all that, right? But would it be lovely if she didn't perpetuate the myth that we need to eat fish for omega-3 fatty acids? Sure. Would it be lovely if she didn't spread misinformation? Yes. Right? Because that's what another common thread is, common complaint is, why did she have to spread this information about omega-3s, right? This became one of the main protests to her declaration that I see that almost every vegan blogger and YouTuber has made posts about. Long episodes about how you can get omega-3s from algae. So you're not going to hear me say any of that here, because I've been talking about skipping the middle fish for years, that we don't need to go through the animals to get to the nutrients that the animals get because the animals eat plants. And the reason I'm not going to talk about it here is because that's not the reason Miley Cyrus spouted off about omega-3s. The reason most ex-vegans talk about the necessity of eating animals, okay, take everything I said into account. People do it for health, restricting calories, not getting enough. Take all that. That's all valid. But the reason most ex-vegans talk about the necessity of eating animals or getting nutrients from animal products, especially and including those who were vegan for the animals, in order to feel better physically, I stopped being vegan because I had to feel better. The reason they say that is because they're not going to say that they just wanted to eat animals because of the pleasure it brings them. Because that doesn't sound so great, does it? Especially if you've spent years talking about how good it feels to not eat animals, about how eating animals isn't really great for the animals, about how we don't need to eat animals to feel good, right? How there's harm in raising and keeping and slaughtering and eating animals. You can't just say you don't care about that anymore. You have to frame your behavior in a way that exonerates you, that literally makes it sound as if you're going against what you really want, but you have no choice. Why? Well, I talk about this in the blindness chapter of The Joyful Vegan, the willful blindness chapter. Here is an excerpt. We all strive to preserve an image of ourselves as consistent, stable, competent, and good. We simply could not function if we believed ourselves to be otherwise. Our most cherished beliefs are a vital and central part of who we are in our own eyes and in the eyes of our friends and colleagues. And I'll add an aside, in the eyes of our audience, of our fans. And so we strive mightily to reduce the pain, either by ignoring the evidence that proves we're wrong or by reinterpreting evidence to support us. Fear of conflict, fear of change, fear of not fitting in compels us to do so. But more than just ignoring or reinterpreting the evidence, we even go so far as to reframe our harmful choices as both necessary and beneficial in order to protect our sense of ourselves as good people. We have to reframe any transgressions that would contradict that. In order to preserve our sense of self-worth when we participate in harmful behaviors, we have to transform those behaviors into noble ones. And that's why we defend our exploitation of animals for food, fun, or fashion by asserting that it's economically necessary, that it's biologically necessary, that it's nutritionally necessary, et cetera, et cetera. And so I go on. So what I'm saying is Miley Cyrus could possibly have felt unwell due to rigid eating or to other lifestyle choices. And yes, of course, she could have done her own research to find out how to feel better. But I suspect she didn't, because that wasn't the issue. I suspect that she probably got further and further away from her original reasons for becoming vegan. which is one of the things I talk about in The Joyful Vegan about bearing witness. I suspect her network of support became smaller than the one she had in the past. Her ex-husband is also ex-vegan, right? So her ex-husband, or when they were, I don't know when he stopped being vegan, I don't pay attention enough, but right, the idea that how big was her vegan community? I don't know. I suspect she got tired of the inconvenience of not eating what she wanted when she wanted it, when everyone else around her was doing what they wanted. And I suspect that she just wanted to eat animal flesh and fluids, because as I quote Tobias Lehnert saying in my book, so many people eat animals because so many people eat animals. We are social creatures through and through, and we don't like feeling left out. This is an aspect of being vegan that vegans mostly ignore. Many assert that if you just cared enough, or cared more, or were more ethical, or had more morals, you could and would never go back to eating animals, right? So you can believe that. But if you believe that and nothing else, you're ignoring a fundamental aspect of human nature, which we simply cannot do if we want to understand why vegans become ex-vegans. From The Joyful Vegan, social creatures through and through, humans yearn to be part of a community of like-minded people who share similar goals, interests, and values. Psychologist Abraham Maslow placed social belonging just after basic physiological and safety needs in his hierarchy of needs, first posited this in 1943. According to Maslow, meeting basic needs such as hunger, thirst, and safety and security, that comes first. Belongingness immediately follows. When it comes to becoming and staying vegan, this is where the rubber meets the road. According to the research, feelings of social isolation and pressure from one's peers and family members can be the hardest part of living a vegan lifestyle. In Faunalytics study of lapsed vegetarians and vegans that I referenced in the beginning of this episode, 63% of former vegetarians and vegans said they didn't like how it made them stick out from the crowd. And almost half said that they didn't have sufficient interactions with fellow vegans or vegetarians. And 84% of those who reverted to eating animals reported that they weren't active in any vegetarian clubs or vegan clubs or organizations. These data suggest that the need to belong is so strong that many people would rather be disconnected from their own values than be disconnected from other people. I'm going to repeat that. These data suggest that the need to belong is so strong that many people would rather be disconnected from their own values that they still hold, they're still ethical, they still care, they're still compassionate, than be disconnected from other people. In social science studies that examine why it's so hard to change behavior we know is causing harm, the conclusions continually point toward the fact that social norms constrain human behavior, as the mere thought of doing something drastically different from what others are doing or what others appear to approve of can lead to intense feelings of discomfort, embarrassment, or shame. And don't you dare say, oh, please, this doesn't apply to celebrities. They can do whatever they want. They can tell people to sod off if they don't like that they're vegan. Heck, they can buy vegan friends if they wanted to. Don't you dare say that. And while I'm exaggerating a bit, it is what I hear people say. And what I see people say. I've seen vegans assert that like she could just buy this information. It's not about the information she didn't get. It's about how we feel as a human being among other human beings. If we think that a high profile protects you from human fears and foibles and the need to belong and that desire to belong, then I got nothing. If you think that you're immune to that, I got nothing. Of course she's like everybody else. Of course we all struggle with this. And just like everybody else, in the end, it's up to each individual to face these challenges, honestly, right? And that's why I provide the resources I do. It's a delusion to say it's different for celebrities, as if fame and money make them immune to social pressure and family expectations and cultural mores, the desire to belong, the desire to not be outside the status quo. Of course they're not immune to these things, but of course it's up to them to face those challenges. It's up to each one of us to face these challenges, right? I'm not saying that these aren't excuses, right? That it's all up to us to understand. No, I'm providing this perspective so that we can step back and understand what's going on. Of course, in the end, it's up to her to okay, if that's what it is, right? Because there is a way around this. There's a way to be outside the status quo and not feel what did I say? To not feel the discomfort, embarrassment, or shame, right? So of course it's up to each one of us individually, but they're not immune to it just because they have fame and fortune. Now, I want to end with a couple more thoughts. It does often seem that when vegans stop being vegan, it's often eggs and fish they return to. Number two, they tend to eat less flesh and fluids than they did before they went vegan in the first place, right? So cold comfort, sure, take from that what you want, right? But it does seem that when vegans stop being vegan, they tend to stick with fish and eggs. Doesn't mean they don't start going back to other animals as well. And it also seems that even though they do go to other animals, that they eat less, that they eat more plants, that the ratio of plants is higher in their overall diet, right? Is it better? Well, it depends on what angle you're looking from. No animal suffering is better than any animal suffering. But quantifiably, is it better than going back to eating more animal flesh and fluids, right? I mean, I think so, right? Don't do nothing because you can't do everything, do something, anything, right? But we forget that we're all on this journey. We're all on a journey. And just as someone who becomes awake can go back to sleep again, so too can they wake up again. In Funalytics survey on recidivism, more than a third, 37% of former vegetarians and vegans indicated that they're interested in resuming a vegetarian vegan diet. Of these individuals, more than half, 60%, said that they're likely or very likely to do so. That's a reason to be hopeful. Don't we want to provide a place for them when they return? My hope is that by gaining insight into why some vegans become ex-vegans, we can not only avoid the traps ourselves, but also be more sympathetic and understanding to those who do lapse and be ready to welcome them back when and if the time comes. Until then, they, like all of us, will surround themselves with the people they feel most supported by, right? They will surround themselves with those who support their decision, right? Those who don't make them feel bad for their behavior, like Joe Rogan, right? Of all people were saying, of all people, why did she have to go on the most anti-vegan podcast and talk about why she's not vegan? Isn't it obvious? He's the safest person to come out ex-vegan to because he's going to support her in her decision. And she knows that. We turn to the people who will make us feel accepted and included and who share our values and ideologies. We all do that. That's why we surround ourselves with people who think like us and vote like us. We all do it. Very few of us want to be challenged. None of us want to be judged. And yet, judge we did, judge we do, and judge we will again. We can do better. This isn't about Miley Cyrus or any of the other people we hear about and know about who stop being vegan. This is about us, who we are, who we want to be, how we want to behave. We express disappointment when celebrities fall from the pedestals we built. And yet, we're the only people we are beholden to. You want to not be disappointed by others? Just focus on yourself. Right? We're the only ones who are in control. We're the only ones who can decide at any given moment who we want to be, how we want to act, how we want to react. We need to be the model of compassion we profess to be, that we want others to be. We need to manifest verbally and non-verbally the kindness, the non-violence, and the non-judgment we say we want others to have by embodying, expressing, exhibiting, and exuding compassion. We experience compassion. That's the best part. Not only will we be models for others that others will look to, we will experience that compassion. We will feel good. If we embody and express and exhibit and exude anger and outrage and judgment, we're going to experience anger, outrage, and judgment, and nobody really wants to emulate that, right? Doesn't feel good, doesn't change a thing. Nobody wants to model that. But if we embody and express and exhibit and exude compassion, that's what we'll model for the world. That's what we'll experience ourselves. May it be so. For the animals, this is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening. This was a long one.